Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for tonight's training for curriculum advisors. If you have the opportunity, please mute your microphone. However, if you have a question that comes up, you have any concerns or anything like that, you can either unmute your microphone and just speak. Just understand that sometimes we forget to unmute. So we start talking and then like nothing happens. So just make sure that you check before you start speaking to unmute your microphone. Or you can use the chat feature, which is either at the bottom or the top of your screens. You'll see the little chat window, and you have the ability to either communicate directly to me if you have a question, or communicate to the whole group. So feel free to use that resource as well if you have any questions that come up throughout. This is designed to take about 40 minutes, so we want to be respectful of your time because you're really giving us a great service. So if you have any questions, you can talk in the middle of it or bring them up afterwards. Either way works for me. You're not going to bother me. I've done this a few times already. But know that the priority is make sure that you have the information you need to be successful. Tonight we're going to cover a few different things, and this is really based on feedback that curriculum advisors from last year gave us in terms of what quality training needs to look like and what information and resources you need to be successful. So we'll talk about the role and its responsibilities, and talk a little bit about the learning outcomes of the Road to Wisdom. We're not going to dive into the material. So if you have questions about the material or would like to talk about what's in there and get more familiar with that, please let us know. Reach out to the curriculum committee and we'll meet with you individually. But this is really just focused on the duty and the roles as curriculum advisors, just so you know. But I'm happy to answer some questions that you have in the middle of that if you need so. We'll also talk about some of the required tasks that have to happen as part of a curriculum, the work with your chapters as curriculum advisors. That includes the membership education calendar and making sure that we have a good documented timeline for the chapter and for all of its activities from the beginning of formal recruitment right through initiation. The candidate registration form and the initiate registration forms, both of which we require to have from the national headquarters. The initiate registration form, where if it's late, that's a 25% late fee, which can really harm a chapter if they do end up turning in their initiates late. So it's really a priority to make sure that they do that. And then activity reviews if they want to modify the Road to Wisdom or they want to add anything to it to meet the culture or the needs of their chapter. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the work around assessment, because we know that for some chapters that becomes a really high priority question. How are we assessing what's happening here? Why did my tests go away? I love the quizzes, blah, blah, blah. We want to make sure that we address that up front and talk about it. And then we'll kind of summarize these timelines and tasks, as well as the resources you have available to you. And you have a lot of people who are out here supporting you and cheering you on. So know that you were chosen not just because you applied, but because you fit the needs and have the maturity and professionalism to actually serve these chapters well. And that's why you were picked. So understand we already have faith in you and your ability to do so. I just want to make sure that we provide you with the tools to get started on that work. So more than anything, as a curriculum advisor, you're a mentor and a resource for your chapters. That means in terms of helping them plan by creating a membership calendar and really thinking through not just their year, but also the lessons themselves and the activities to make sure that they're effective. It means helping them if they want to modify the Road to Wisdom, understand how that works and complete the process and walk through that with them if they need so. And then helping them with the actual educational process if they have questions about how do I effectively teach this, or my class all fell asleep on me, what do I do now? That there's a lot of resources in which your VPMs may ask, and so we want to be supportive of that. And then an addition this year that is a priority for us as a national fraternity is to just make sure that those forms and that paperwork is turned in on time and is complete. And so that's why we're talking about the membership candidate form and the initial registration form up front. And then more than anything, communication. Communicating with your chapters to see where things are and to keep up with it. Communicating with myself if you have any chapter concerns or because your job is not to be the law enforcement of the fraternity. That's what I'm constitutionally bound to do. But you are there to be a resource for these chapters. And if something comes up or if you have a concern, we want to share that so we can actually help the chapters out and give them the resources and the answers that they need. And then if there's questions you have in terms of education or in terms of the curriculum, reaching out to the curriculum committee. But all of that is predicated on you taking the initiative to reach out, because we're going to do our best to monitor this work. But as you can imagine, trying to keep track of 215 chapters operating under 215 different timeframes for membership education is a little difficult to do as a national fraternity. And so your help is really vital. Just to kind of talk really briefly about the Road to Wisdom and kind of an overview. The goal of the Road to Wisdom, more than anything, is to provide a baseline of information across the fraternity so that all of our brothers are prepared and successful, not just as members, but ready to move beyond graduation, to be active alumni, and to also be productive members of society, like all of our universities wanted us to do. That includes being able to talk about and actually promote our values, not just in their band program, but also across their campus and in their community. Giving them real life skills, whether that's in the professionalism range or whether it's in critical thinking and problem solving. And then making sure that they have some basic knowledge that they can actually use on how a chapter operates and how it's supposed to, how the district operates, and how we as a national fraternity make decisions and work forward, so that all brothers have that information and know how these things work. And then more than anything, it's about taking us away from a model where we have 215 different ideas of membership education. I'm moving it to a national brotherhood, so that you are my peer, you're my brother. We are all brothers of Kappa Kappa Psi. We just have some different flair because our band programs require it. And so that's not necessarily about, destroying culture, but it is about understanding a national culture and a national identity. And so that means that there is some changing in terms of changing our culture as a fraternity, moving away from kind of the one-sided relationship of VPMs, where it's, I have a bunch of knowledge, I'm going to give it to you, and you need to prove that you're worthy of it. But instead being more empathetic and more collegial, because after first degree, these are probationary brothers of our order. We have verified that they are ready to be brothers. They are just lacking the information to be successful brothers. And so that's our job through membership ed. But also trying to deal with, and this was my experience through membership ed as much as anyone's, either secret activities or activities that weren't really well planned or really well organized. And so I either didn't get what the lesson was, or the lesson that was provided really didn't have any educational value or really meet our values as an organization. And that is a change only in the fact that, and all of us were college kids at one point too, this is not necessarily your first priority in life. And so your organization makes you able to balance keeping your grades up, keeping that job going, and also being a VPM. And that's why they have a resource in you, because that work really is vital and really is difficult. Your first real task with working with your chapters is just making that initial communication and starting that chain of back and forth as they have questions. So you'll receive an email a little later today with the contact information for the chapters that you're assigned to. And that will include not only contact information for the VPMs, but also the chapter presidents, as well as the sponsors and directors of bands. And it's recommended that you CC all those people in that first email, just so that they're aware of who you are, as well as to help you in case the VPM information that we have in the online system is out of date, so that we can actually go back to and say, it turns out that person isn't here anymore. We forgot to turn in our officer form. Let's fix that. But also so that the sponsors and directors, as well as the presidents, if they have questions, can have a resource they can go to as well. While your work is exclusively with the chapter VPMs, that doesn't mean that you're unable, in some cases, to help the chapter presidents or the sponsors understand next steps or understand how something works. But understand that if you don't know, then you just pass it along. If you don't hear from your chapters within about a week after sending that initial email, just let us know, and we can deal with the kind of follow-up and make sure that it stays on that. But it really requires you to make sure that you're paying attention to the fact that you haven't heard from Theta Rho, but you've heard from the other 3 chapters that you're assigned to, the other 2 chapters you're assigned to. You're going to have to be a little bit smart in terms of tracking that. And in some cases, there's some great examples in our Edmodo community of some of our curriculum advisors in the past who've used spreadsheets or different communication tools to make sure that they're covering the material and making sure that they're following up if they need to. If your chapter VPM doesn't have access to Edmodo or is unable to do so, just let us know. We can work with them directly and get the login information to add them to Edmodo right away. And then while it's recommended that you talk with your chapter every other week, roughly speaking, it's always helpful to schedule a time every week that you can plan to talk in case they have questions. So it also helps you in terms of keeping up with your time. So if you want to organize all your chapters to have the same time that you talk, and you'll do a video chat on a Google Hangout with your chapter VPM, and then if they have follow-up questions, then you can circle back on it. If you can just mute your microphone, that'd be awesome. Thank you. As you kind of have that conversation, if you have any difficulty getting a hold of your VPMs, if that conversation is going really well and then it just kind of trails off, whatever, just let us know, and we can help in terms of helping keep them as well. The next task you'll really have in front of you is the membership education calendar. We'll talk a little bit about the elements that are within a good calendar. But please understand that in terms of that work, that needs to be completed about 2 weeks before formal recruitment begins. So for a lot of chapters, they may have an informal recruitment. Maybe they do a welcome day during band week or whatever that is. But there's a period in which they start formal recruitment. There's actual activities that are formalized that that provide either an overview of the organization or an overview of the brother. Your mic would be awesome. If you can mute your mic, that'd be great. Thanks. Awesome. Thank you all. I know that can be kind of, sometimes you can forget about it. No problem. Don't worry about it. But just so we can make sure everyone can hear what's going on. You'll want to make sure that membership education calendar is in about 2 weeks before that formal recruitment starts, which means they probably can't start it 2 weeks before formal recruitment starts because it's not going to be enough time to get it approved. That process involves you as well as the curriculum committee, but that process for the curriculum committee is really just as a double check. So you want to think about how much time you have to review these materials. That being said, it's 2 weeks before their formal recruitment, and many of your chapters have a late fall or a spring class. So they may want to work on their calendars and build a draft now, and then develop a larger draft or a formal draft later as they have more formal dates or as band events fall into place and they can actually schedule it better. But at least it gets that work going. They will take, and the links were shared with you this morning, but they have them in their Edmodo community as well as will have it in your Edmodo community. The information for them to fill out a form to fill out their calendar. In that form, it has examples of good calendars for them to use as reference. And then you are the first line of feedback for them. So you can either approve the calendar to move forward or ask them to make some revisions. If, let's say, they're doing 3 lessons in the course of 1 day, you say, how is that possible? How are you going to get enough time to do that? Or if they have an activity, you say, hey, wait a second. I don't think that needs to be part of membership education. Is that required for the candidates or not? it gives you a chance to give them feedback and work on that. And we'll talk about some of the elements that are helpful in a calendar and the information that needs to be in there. But if you have questions about something, or if you say, I'm not sure, or this concerns me, then just let us know. And then we can make sure that we can help you as well and fill in those gaps. Because every chapter is going to have a unique question. It would be impossible for us to write an FAQ that covered 215 different versions of the same questions. So in a lot of cases, it's just helpful to reach out to us directly and we can work on it. After you've given your feedback, that your form gets forwarded up, if it's approved, to the curriculum committee. They do a double check, so don't worry, you're not the last line of defense, but you are the first. And then the curriculum committee can double check the work and approve the calendar. And again, that needs to be done about 2 weeks before formal recruitment starts. And I said before, there's a form for you to fill out and there's a form for them. Those forms are very, very similar. They include a lot of the same information. And so all you're really doing is checking to make sure that they checked everything they're supposed to do and it's complete. That in most cases will be straightforward, but you may have some really good feedback about timing and about organization. Our quality calendar will include the dates of all the degrees of the ritual, the dates of every membership education meeting, as well as the times for these events, and then any other mandatory events that the candidates might have, whether it's membership education, meetings, whether it's chapter meetings, anything like that. You'll want to include band events, athletic events, campus holidays and breaks, anything that might disrupt or modify the calendar for a brother or for a membership candidate. You'll want to include the deadlines for submitting any forms or any paperwork to make sure that the chapters are keeping themselves honest, to say, hey, first degree is on Thursday, which means that a week from Thursday, this paperwork is due. Awesome, now we remember and we can all remind each other. And then it needs to include any joint events. If they have joint events with Tau Beta Sigma, if they do joint recruitment with all the musical organizations, anything like that, that needs to be included in that calendar. But more than anything, you're looking to make sure, is there a reasonable amount of time to conclude this event? Whether it's reasonably long enough or reasonably short enough. Because in some cases, chapters may say, well, we have a 5-hour membership education block. Well, none of us can stay awake for 5 hours to learn about membership education, and we love this stuff. So understand that you are going to have a really great point of feedback to say, let's talk about what's reasonable. Let's talk about what's in the best interest of your fellow brothers and the best interest of yourself. Because as a VPM, no one wants to talk for 5 hours. And then make sure that they can actually cover the material to conclude the process. The nice thing about the Road to Wisdom is that even the last lesson can be actually moved to the end. And lessons can be truncated if we have chapters that may only have a 2-week window to do membership intake. If that's the case, they can do shorter versions of the lessons and then do follow-up as part of post-membership education across the whole chapter. But the important thing is that they plan that in advance. They don't want to be surprised and say, oh, by the way, we forgot to talk about the founders. Luckily, that's not a big deal. It's only our centennial. And so it's really incumbent on us to help them kind of remind them, keep them on track and say, hey, by the way, you forgot lesson 7. So let's add that in. Or you forgot to include any events for band. Is band not happening? If it isn't, awesome. But if it's not, and there is band events, let's make sure we include that in that calendar. A mandatory task for every chapter is going to be their membership candidate registration form and the initiate registration form. The membership candidate registration form, that started last year, and that's a way for us to note all the candidates and have their approval that they have read and understand the risk management policies of the organization before they start formal education. And that's due within 7 days of the first degree of the ritual. It's really recommended that chapters have at first degree, have the membership candidates fill out the paperwork right there, get it all complete, and then all they have to do is they have 6 more days to track down the director of bands and sponsor and get that signature from them. That's a lot easier. They have to make sure they include all the candidates, but that may mean that they have an extra copy of the page with the information because so-and-so didn't do their initiation till Wednesday, when everyone else did it on Sunday because they weren't available on Sunday or they slept in. That's acceptable as long as all that material is complete within 7 days of that first group of brothers finishing their first degree ritual. We're in the process of moving that to the OMRS. So eventually this is going to be an online form, but I want to show you in a minute the paper form, because there's a possibility that you will have chapters that will start that process before they realize, or we have available the online form. We're actually testing it right now. The other form that's important is the initiate registration form. This is required of all chapters. It's that initiation that includes the dues. And that's due 30 days after initiation, and it includes all the initiated candidates. So if a brother if a membership candidate does not complete membership education, they start at first degree, but they don't make it to third degree, you just don't include them on that form for third degree, and then we will follow up. The revisions that we're making in terms of moving this to the OMRS will actually ask the chapter to give us some reasons why those brothers or those membership candidates did not complete the process. But in the short term, we at least want to make sure that we have a complete list of all the initiated brothers. And we mention this again because if the chapter turns this in late, it's a 25% late fee. So that means if they brought in a class of 8, it's the equivalent of adding 2 more brothers to that process in terms of dues. And for a lot of chapters, that amount of money can make or break them. So we really want to be attentive and be supportive of chapters to remind them, and to be dogging them just as much as they should dog themselves to get this stuff in on time. This is what the paper version of the membership candidate registration form looks like. I'll highlight a couple of things that are really important to pay attention to. You'll see on the right is the information for each of the individual membership candidates. That includes some demographic information, as well as a permanent and email address. Those are really important when we're talking about the OMRS and making sure that's there, but also that they have a signature for every single membership candidate. That signature is not just to say, hey, I have a name, here's how it looks, but it's also to certify that they have received and understand the information on our risk management policies and are ready to be a membership candidate of our order. This is as much of anything a risk management review, but it also provides an opportunity for our membership candidates to ensure that they are ready to start the process and they know their rights and responsibilities. You'll see on the left, on the first page, the dates of first, second, and third degrees, the ritual, and the membership candidate orientation meeting are given up front. And they should be on there when the candidates sign that form. So that way there is no surprises. Again, going back to that idea of moving away from secret rituals and secret membership ed to something that's more formal and more professionalized, that's really empathetic and supportive of our fellow brothers. The form concludes, and this is the part that most chapters, if they forget anything, this is what they're going to forget, is the signatures of the president and the VPM, as well as the director of bands and sponsor. I will tell you, this is the one that we follow up on the most. So it's just helpful to make sure that you remind them that that needs to be included. And the nice thing about this form is that while, yes, it can be mailed in, if they would like to save the price of a stamp or remember what a post office is, they can also email this. They can fax it, although I would be very stunned if a chapter was more comfortable faxing than mailing at this point. Or they can actually take even a picture of the form as long as it is complete and you can actually read the material. They can take a picture of it and submit that over email as well. On the Edmodo community and on the curriculum website, kkpsi.org/curriculum, there's a fillable version of this form, a fillable PDF, that they can fill it out and then just sign the blanks where it says signature and at the end. So if they want to do that and then just mail that in or scan it in or fax it in or whatever it takes. The important thing again is that is out the door 7 days after the first degree of the ritual. For some of your chapters, they're going to want to modify the Road to Wisdom to either add activities or make some modifications to the opportunities for education that happen for your candidates. And any modification that goes beyond the Road to Wisdom, that would include recruitment events, chapter ceremonies, educational activities, social events, anything like that, just needs to be reviewed. And this isn't about taking away a chapter's ability to do activities, far from it. It's to make sure that if you're going to do an activity, we just know that it aligns to our risk management policies, that we don't have to be concerned about it, and that you're aware of best practices, that this actually makes sense within the road to wisdom. So if you're trying to get away with a scavenger hunt, we'll tell you no. Scavenger hunts are not allowed. That's a form of hazing. But what we may follow up with you on is say, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And if your lesson is we'd like them to have a better understanding of campus, is there a better way than a scavenger hunt to teach them about what is on campus and why does it matter to the fraternity? So that it's really an educational process. For some chapters, this is a big roadblock because it requires them to be complete, to include the times of day, to include all the actors, to include a script if they're going to say things. It requires planning. And so you may start this right off the bat because this stuff is kind of hard. But it's important that the chapters do this completely. Your role in this is simply to remind them of the form and to encourage them to submit it if there's activities. And if they don't submit it, to let us know, to say, hey, they're doing an activity, but they didn't submit a form yet, I don't think. Or reach out to us and say, hey, did they get one in? The governors are actually the ones that review this activity, and they have a training coming up in a couple weeks so that they have the same information and they're prepared to understand your role and how to work with you as leaders, as well as how to review these calendars and review this educational activities, activity forms, and be prepared for it. And then their recommendation comes to me, and my job is to either approve the activity, ask for revisions, or deny the activity. It just depends on what is the best course of action. If there's any resubmissions, and it happens a lot, we didn't deny that many activities. The ones that were denied were there was very clear reasons why. But a lot of times we ask for resubmissions and revisions because either the activity is unclear, it's missing a script, it's missing some important details. And so we just ask the chapter to fill that in and then resubmit the activity, but that goes right to me. So that doesn't involve having to go back to the governors or anything like that. And a lot of times if you have a chapter that's not sure or asking questions, just have them contact me directly. I'm happy to Skype into a chapter meeting or have a one-on-one call with a VPM and help them work through a program that is particularly difficult and get an activity approved that's important to them. When we have that meeting, I will include you on that communication as well. So if you would like to join in on the call or join in on the Hangout or the Zoom meeting or whatever, that you are welcome to do so. Otherwise, if you want, I can also record that for you so you have the same information. Again, this is a partnership. We're all working together on this. But when it comes to these activity reviews, ultimately the buck stops in my office. And so we want to make sure that you have the information that you need, but that they have the support that they need. And because this process can take some time, as you can imagine, getting an activity, especially a lengthy activity approved, can take a little bit of time. Make sure they get that in early because we don't want to overwhelm the governors. I will tell you that we had some governors that had over 50 activities. We had other governors that had 3. And so we just want to be very mindful of that. And so the earlier they can get it in, the other thing is that make sure that they have a lot of time to do revisions and make sure it's really ready to go. This again goes back to that whole idea of preparation being a valuable piece of membership ed. This link, along with the other ones, were shared with you earlier today, but the activity review form is out there for the chapters to use. You can look at the form as well. You don't get in trouble if you try to fill it out and see what's in there and say, oh, this is what they're asking. Okay, when my chapter asks, I'll know what's going on. Feel free to use that. Just understand that if you submit something for a fake chapter, you're going to get Marco emailing you back saying, what did you just do? Because now I have to sit and review it. So maybe don't hit the submit button, but feel free to look through it and kind of look at the information that's needed. A common question that comes up for a lot of chapters is the question of assessment. So when I was a membership candidate, which was a little while ago, but probably not going to tell you how long, assessment was really done only through quizzes and tests. The idea that I have given you knowledge, you must prove that you're worthy of that knowledge and that you've paid attention. And we're moving away from that for a couple reasons. One, it creates an unfair dynamic that isn't really in line with our ritual. The second thing is that it's not good educational practice. But more than anything, the ability to immediately remember the Greek letter order is a lot less important than remembering our values and being able to actually live them. And so we put the priority there. That being said, assessment does have a value for a couple reasons, and the most important being Did I provide the information you needed to understand our values? Did you have a chance to absorb it? Did I explain it to you clearly enough? The other reason being that in assessment, is there material that is helpful for us to cover because there's different ways of looking at something? If we think about our values, right, there are many different ways to think about how to be good musicians. If chapters have not had that opportunity to have that discussion, assessment allows them to look at that and say, hey, we have some different ways we're looking at this. Let's talk about it and understand what this means in terms of our chapter and in terms of the vision that a director of bands has. And so there are two real resources within the Road to Wisdom that chapters can use to do assessment. The first is a lesson review. This is located at the end of every lesson. And as you can see, it just provides a basic overview of the information that was covered within the lesson. There's a couple different ways that chapters can use this. They might use it within the moment to have people take notes at the same time. They may take this and say, hey, follow up in a couple days with your big brother and look at this material. And then if you have any questions, you can ask them and say, hey, I kind of got confused about this whole motto thing. What was that verb that we use, or what does that look like? Then it gives them an opportunity to have that conversation. Still, other chapters have actually had the membership candidates complete this in between membership admin meetings, and then bring it to the beginning of the next meeting to just look at it as a chapter of brothers and say, hey, all of you really were struggling with the preamble. Let's go over it one more time before we move on to the next lesson. But the idea, again, is that you're really assessing this knowledge and checking it out, but not necessarily using it as some kind of determinative, you didn't get 90% right, therefore you're a terrible brother. Because I will tell you, as someone who didn't get 90% right, I'm doing all right. So the more important thing is to make sure that people have the knowledge to really be good brothers, more than just being knowledgeable ones. The other addition is an Appendix L, and that's the portfolio project. In the appendix, there's a lot of different examples of ways that chapters can do the portfolio project. I will tell you, it's really encouraged for you to have this conversation early with your vice presidents, because not planning this activity out can lead to some pretty interesting outcomes where people come up with creative ways to do something that really don't help or really don't do a good job of actually demonstrating any knowledge. They just look like a pretty cake. Or you might get membership candidates that really get distracted and start to struggle because they have other opportunities, other obligations that go on, and they don't plan in advance. So this is a good thing to bring up early, to talk to your VPM about how are you going to do the portfolio project, what methods, what's your stricture for it, how do you want to present that material when they've completed it, when is it due, is that in your calendar? When the due date is for that, does it get reviewed by the whole chapter, and do we all talk about it? Is it just the VPM? What does that look like? And as you'll see, there are a lot of different ways. One of the great things about Kappa Kappa Psi is that we are so diverse, and so there's a ton of different ways that people can express our values and express what we believe in. And it's really encouraged to look at these, look for examples, and let chapters be creative if there's more that's not there. I know that for a lot of chapters, they really took this and ran with it being as presentations or songs, rehearsal and recitals, like anything like that. There's a lot of different ways in which they can use our values and demonstrate them through the portfolio project. So let me recap a couple important timelines and tasks. First, we talked about in the beginning, you want to communicate with your chapter at minimum every couple weeks. It's really recommended, again, to set up a date once a week just so that it's on the calendar. But then that gives you the flexibility to say, hey, you guys have midterms. Let's skip this week. We'll cover next week. If you're looking for efficiency, or if you're looking to maximize your time, you might have that initial conversation happen with all your membership educators at the same time, and then let them do follow-up questions afterwards individually. And that might be a great way to talk about the information broadly, but also give them a chance to connect with their peers. They have an Edmodo community as well, and it's really recommended that they use that. but you may use your time as a curriculum advisor to help your chapters that are geographically close, or in terms of size and in terms of scope, they may be close. The next activity is that membership education calendar, which again is due about 2 weeks before formal recruitment. That needs to be approved by that point. So again, they don't want to start this out 15 days out and assume they can get it all approved in one day. Activity reviews that have to be approved before the event takes place. We know that that may not always work out, where a chapter doesn't realize they had to do an activity review or forgets and does it a little bit later. This is a learning process, but the priority is to get it approved ahead of time. That way we know that we're good to go. And then finally, the membership candidate registration form and the initiate registration form. The membership candidate form, which is due 7 days after first degree, and the initiate registration form that's due 30 days after initiation. And that includes the payment of dues. Some last minute advice as some highlights, and then we'll leave some time for questions. One, you have an Edmodo community, as do your chapters, so please use that. If you have questions, if you're looking for good examples, if you say, hey, can anyone give me a good version of your introductory email so that I don't have to like reinvent the wheel to come up with one? Use the Edmodo community to share that information or to ask those questions. The curriculum committee is also monitoring Edmodo, so we're happy to answer questions through that, as well as emailing us directly. And then if it's something that's helpful for everyone, we'll be sharing it on Edmodo as well. As I said in the beginning, and I'll say throughout, communication is important. It's not just a thing that we hear people trying to run on to be a chapter officer. It's something that's valuable in this work as well, because there's really no such thing as too many questions or too much information. So don't feel bad about really encouraging chapters. Hey, that's a really great question. I don't have the answer. Let's email together the curriculum committee and get an answer. Or let's email Marco directly and see if he has an answer. Things like that. The important thing is to keep that communication flowing and not just let it rest. If you have a bad week, just let us know. If you say, hey, you know what, it's midterms for me too. I'm not going to get back to my chapters for about 2 weeks because I got to study for it. Just let us know. We can do the follow-up for you. That's why we have extra curriculum advisors to support that work. But it only works if you tell us in advance. Otherwise, you're harming yourself as well as harming the chapters. So your communication is key. And then ask questions at any point. We are here to learn with you. I will tell you that not only the book itself, but a lot of the processes that we've followed throughout the Road to Wisdom have been modified and improved because of feedback from curriculum advisors and chapters across the country, as well as directors and sponsors. So your feedback matters. In fact, this training is a direct result of the feedback given to us by curriculum advisors last year in terms of what information is necessary to be successful. And finally, as a resource, online on the KKPSI TV YouTube channel, there are roadside assistants, which I know is just as corny as it sounds, for the roadside assistants for the Road to Wisdom. But there it is. There are videos that are helpful to answer some very common questions that chapters might run into. I really recommend them as a great way to start a conversation. So if you want to remind all your chapters about activity reviews, maybe ask them to watch the videos on activity reviews first, and then follow up with you afterwards if they have questions. And that way the material is always there. It's a great resource for you as well. And I'll tell you, if you come up with a question or you have something that you say, boy, it'd really be great if there was a video on this, just let us know. We'll be recording them throughout the fall and spring as well. So we really want your feedback on that. And as well, if you really want to record one, you're welcome to do it. We will not stop you. I am not one of those people who loves to be on camera. That's why I'm doing a screen share. So if that's something that you're interested in, just let us know. The curriculum committee is always looking to expand that work and expand our membership. And finally, you have a lot of resources that are available to you individually as well as to your chapters. Evan Thompson, our national president, as well as myself, especially if you have any issues with individual chapters or any concerns like that, we're a great resource there. We are both included on the curriculum at kkpsi.org email account. So if you have a hard time remembering Evan's first name or a hard time trying to spell Krasodovich, at least if you can spell curriculum, you can get a hold of us because we're on that same email. And then if nothing else, Yvonne Day, our chair as the curriculum committee chair, it can be a great resource. She has been a curriculum advisor. She has worked with chapters. She has seen throughout implementation and been a part of this process. So she can be a great resource if you run into a snag or you say, hey, what's the best way to do X, Y, and Z? So please use us. That's what we're here for. We're here to support you, and we're here to make this work. Before I open it up for questions, I just want to add one more thing, and that is thank you. Thank you for being a mature and thoughtful professional within the fraternity, for giving up your time and your talent and your treasures for the fraternity, for the betterment of our brothers and our order. And thank you more than anything for the fact that you are willing to sit here, have this conversation, learn about this material, and share it. Mentorship is a valuable piece. All of us can think of a brother who was probably the mentor that got us through our darkest days, got us through membership ed, anything like that. You are now that brother. And we as a national fraternity entrust you with that because we know you can be successful. There was no one who was chosen that we had any concerns about. You have a gift, and we're hopeful that we're excited for you to share that with your chapters. That being said, you don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to have all the resources. Use us to help you with that work. So with that, I wanted to leave some time for if there are any questions, if there's anything that comes up. If you've been a curriculum advisor in the past and you'd like to share a little bit about your experience or anything that is important to note, I welcome you to share that at this time.
I have a quick question, Marco. Michelle Bannis here. I remember in my experience as being a CA last year that we were assigned like a point of contact person to kind of like help us through questions and related issues. Mine specifically, I remember being Christine Beeson. Just wondering if it's appropriate to still reach out to that person, or if we'll be assigned a new person or a new individual, or if that's just something that got us through the first year.
There will be someone who will be assigned from the curriculum committee to monitor that. We're doing that a little bit later because we want to make sure that we get through getting the curriculum advisors assigned first and looking at load. But yes, you will have a contact point throughout this, and their job is more than anything is to just make sure that you have the answers you need. Like you said, Michelle, really just making sure that you know where things are, that you know how to access resources you need, and that things are progressing well. And also to be a point of feedback if, for example, your chapter has not turned in a candidate registration form yet, but we just received an initiate registration form. Well, then wait a second, how is that even possible? So we're helpful, we're there as well, and that's one of the jobs of those volunteers within the curriculum committee. So really great question.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hi, Marco. This is Jeffrey McKinster.
Yes.
So one of the questions I had was about the calendars being due before recruitment events started. So what if they don't know about things that far in advance? Like they don't know like when their lessons are going to be because you don't know your candidates yet, so you don't necessarily know their schedules.
Sure. So the calendar that's approved will have some rough dates for things like during this week at 7 p.m. It will either be Monday, Wednesday, or Friday, or whatever that is. Okay. This is when this event will happen. You want to provide enough information that we can be sure that we know that they have thought this through, that they are ready, and then we'll be looking for a revision. So in a lot of cases, if you have a chapter that doesn't have a class until the spring and they do their calendar today, it is almost certain that calendar is going to change between now and then. And so if that's the case, all they need to do is resubmit the calendar to the curriculum committee to look at it and just have an update. That way we have a more recent version.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah. And then I had another question about the activity reviews for recruitment events.
Yeah.
I didn't see that in the handbook for last year. Did you guys create
and
that?
It started in the middle of last year as we recognized that recruitment events didn't really have a way to evaluate them. We're in the process of actually forming a recruitment committee to actually build these resources for chapters and to do a more formal way so that we can get away from having to review them. but at least in this year, we're asking to have them reviewed. And that way we can just make sure that whatever recruitment events are going out, we have a sense of what we're doing nationwide. There's a lot of that review is really just at the risk management level. There's not much else, but we are actually asking chapters to submit that. That being said, those are formal recruitment events. So if they informally say, you can come and talk to me at the 50-yard line after practice, that is not a recruitment event. But if they say at the 50-yard line, there will be cupcakes and cake, come get, now you're starting to get towards formal. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So are they going to have to submit one for every event they do, or is there going to be like a database that you guys have?
For a lot of them, we've just had chapters submit, here are our recruitment events, XYZ. That's a lot easier for them if they just have kind of a standard stack that they're going to use. And our goal, once we move to a more formal process with a committee, is to just kind of put some guidelines in place so that chapters know what's inbounds and what's not.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
Okay, Marco, this is Donald Lee. I've got a question for you.
Sure.
I am trying to get into the group on this Edmodo page, and I've got Edmodo on my phone as an app. How do I get into this thing?
Sure. So the link that I sent you today has the access to get right into it. I would use that link. The actual, those last digits after Edmodo that are on there, those are the digits that actually are the access code to join as well. And then when you join, you're joining as a student. And then if you run into any questions on that, feel free to just email me or email the curriculum committee, and we can give you a little bit longer tutorial if you need it to just kind of walk through it.
Oh, you said I'm joining as a student?
Yes, please.
Rats, I got to create a new account.
Yeah,
Because
sorry
I got a
about
teacher
that.
account, I'm an educator.
Well, you know what?
Okay.
You can still join as a teacher. It won't stop you from joining as a teacher. We have restrictions already in place as far as teachers go. It's just easier to join as a student because that's the access level that you need. But you can join as a teacher, and then we will move you to student without you having to create a new account.
Okay, will do.
Okay, with that, and I'm a person who, I'll be honest, probably the day after, while I'm in the shower, the minute that I hang up on this call, something will come up, and that's totally fine. Again, I just want to make sure that if you have questions, you can email myself, email the curriculum committee, email Yvonne, email Evan. We're here for you, and we really want to be supportive of you and supportive of your work. Again, you're going to receive an email a little bit later with the chapters that you have, as well as the contact information for all the members. Whenever you send out your email, that first initial email, if you don't get a response back within a week, let us know. That's really the kickoff to this work. And it may take you a little bit of time to get that first response going. We're here to help you on that. But more than anything, again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for giving up about 45 minutes of your evening. And we're here to help you. Have a good night, everyone.